The Roman Colosseum is famous for the historical battles that occurred in it. The arena held thousands of fights over the 400 years that it was used for. This video is going to go over some of the most ridiculous matchups and types of fights that happened in the Roman Colosseum over the years. Naval battles. The naval battles staged by the Romans were brutal, highly choreographed fights that often resulted in real deaths. In early spectacles held in the Colosseum, the Romans recreated famous sea battles from history or mythology. Participants were usually prisoners of war, condemned criminals, or enslaved people forced to fight as rowers and soldiers aboard small ships. These vessels would have to maneuver in confined water and crash into each other all the while. Fighters would throw spears, shoot arrows, and even board other ships to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Some reenactments even included ramming tactics to sink enemy boats. Men would also be thrown into the water, therefore drowning was just as common as dying by someone else. The water itself could become filled with massive amounts of debris and bodies, making it very nearly impossible to actually escape or climb back onto a ship if you had fallen overboard. Unlike gladiatorial combat, which could sometimes end in mercy, these naval battles were often closer to mass executions and disguised as entertainment, with little chance of survival for the people who were unfortunate enough to participate. Some of these naval battles would be enormous. Some of the earlier shows organized by Julius Caesar had reportedly involved thousands of fighters, making these events among the most deadly spectacles to be shown in the Roman Colosseum. These displays would not only be used as entertainment, but would also serve as a reminder of Rome's naval power and its ability to dominate both land and sea. Man versus animal. Another type of spectacles known as venaciones would be showcased. In these events, humans were pitted against wild animals in contests that could only be described as brutally unfair. The only real purpose of this type of spectacles was to shock and entertain the crowds of the Colosseum. Those who would participate in these fights were often condemned criminals, prisoners of war, or occasionally trained animal hunters. Some of the creatures these fighters would face include mostly lions, tigers, leopards, and bears. However, it has been reported that even exotic animals such as elephants, rhinoceroses, and hippopotamuses were imported from all across the Roman Empire to fight in the Colosseums. The animals were transported long distances, often under harsh conditions, which really just added to their aggression and unpredictability in the arena. This would make it nearly impossible for any of the competitors to survive in a battle with them. If it wasn't already unfair enough for these fighters, it was fairly standard procedure to starve the animals to make them even more aggressive. All the while, humans were only given minimal weapons and protection, which would only ensure a swift, violent, and overall brutal outcome. In some cases, elaborate sets or staged hunts were created to make the battles more entertaining. But the core purpose of these spectacles were to demonstrate Rome's dominance with the showcasing of these exotic animals that they were able to import. Overall, these types of spectacles were really just entertainment for the audience, as the fighters were never expected to win in any capacity. Emperor versus prisoner. Emperor Commodus, who reigned between 180 to 192 AD, was notorious for personally entering the arena to fight. However, his fights were actually very carefully staged to ensure he was never in real danger. Unlike true gladiators, Commodus would fight against very weak or injured animals and typically faced opponents who were either weakened or unarmed. In other words, he would never actually fight anyone who could be a threat to him. This type of contest was quite clearly unfair and was often humiliating for the people who had to fight him. He often appeared as a hunter, killing exotic animals like lions or ostriches from a safe distance using spears or bows, sometimes even from elevated platforms where he couldn't be reached. These performances were less about combat and more about showcasing his power and control. In other cases, he fought injured or disabled individuals, which would basically turn these spectacles into just one-sided executions. Despite the lack of real risk, Commodus presented himself as a heroic gladiator, even dressing himself up like Hercules on some occasions, and demanded that the Roman people praise his victories. These performances generally disturbed the Roman elite, as an emperor lowering himself into the arena, while at the same time just rigging the outcome of the fight was seen as dishonorable. He reportedly entered the arena over 700 times before his assassination in 192 AD. No mercy. In the Colosseum, some contests were staged as absolute no-mercy death matches. In these spectacles, the expectation was usually not to witness a display of skill or sport, but rather to see a definitive, fatal outcome. While many gladiatorial fights could end with a defeated fighter appealing for mercy from the crowd or the presiding official, certain fights removed that possibility entirely. Essentially, these matches were just executions disguised as combat and entertainment. Usually, the spectacle would include a pair of condemned prisoners who were forced to fight trained gladiators, or even each other with no chance of survival. Even though the matches were supposed to disguise these executions as combat, the crowd usually understood that these matches were meant to end in death, which meant that their reactions, if anything, would often encourage even greater brutality. Occasionally, even professional gladiators were ordered to fight to the death, especially during grand spectacles meant to celebrate emperors or major events. These matches emphasized finality, as once the fight began, it would only end when one or even both participants were dead. Commodus, who was infamous for his fascination with arena violence, was known as one of the emperors who oversaw the no-mercy types of fights the most. In general, the brutality of these fights, combined with the roaring reactions of the crowd, made them some of the most brutal and unfair displays of Roman entertainment for those who were forced to participate. Blindfolded battles. This final spectacle that occurred in the Roman Colosseum has to be one of the craziest types of fights that the Romans ever showed. These blindfolded battles are exactly what they sound like. Two fighters, usually criminals, would be given nothing but a short sword and a helmet that didn't have any eye openings. In some instances, they would be given clubs or axes, but the general purpose was that they would be forced to engage in close combat and were unable to keep their distance. This was to try to make the fight more interesting. In addition to not being able to see anything, they also could not hear anything, making it a truly terrifying experience. The purpose of these fights were to entertain the audience before larger and more important battles, usually between gladiators. They were often considered as humorous and comedic spectacles. However, for those participating, it had to be one of the most horrifying things to be a part of. During the battles, fighters would reportedly just try to swing their sword and pray that they would not get hit. In general, these fights were very brutal, as the fight would only end once there is only one survivor remaining. The worst thing about this kind of fight is that the winner of the battle would only be forced to fight over and over again until his luck most likely ran out and he was killed. Overall, the blindfolded battles are definitely one of the crazier types of matchups that were displayed in the Roman Colosseum. Thanks for watching. Consider leaving a like if you enjoyed.